All right, Nick, let's talk about the Miami Dolphins. As we all know, the new league year is just a few days away, right around the corner. Free agency is about to open up. And the Miami Dolphins, after a few disappointing postseason bailouts, this team needs to make some upgrades. And we have some really great fits for this team that we think would be absolutely perfect. Sitting at about $28 million in cap space in their pocket to burn. We've got some great value additions for the Miami Dolphins. So, Nick, without further ado, why don't you get us in? What do you got first for the Dolphins?
Yeah, when you look at the Miami Dolphins situation, $28 million, it sounds like a healthy amount, but I'm sure as you Dolphins fans have followed, the reality is compared to most teams in the NFL, that's really not that good. That's actually in the bottom half of cap space. And of course, that means the Dolphins have to look for value options because they're going to be outbid for the top of market guys. The guys have the great PFF ratings, the guys that have made the all pros and things like that. They can afford maybe one of those guys, but they've got a few holes. I think they should address all of them with a good chunk of the players we're about to mention. So they got to look for the value guys, maybe not the greatest headline grabbers. Without further ado, let's start with the offensive guard and our first guy, and that's Patrick Mekari. Now we list him here as an offensive guard, but the reality is Mekari is a very versatile player. He's been a solid player for the Baltimore Ravens. He's not a dominant guy. He's not an all-pro guy. He's a great glue guy. Again, versatile, can line up all over the place. I think he's much better as a guard. He's a solid player across the board, better pass blocker than run blocker, but he's a very willing, high effort run blocker. If we pull up his stats here, you can see he's 27 years old. His overall PFF grade is 59.0. His run blocking grade is weighing that down to 56, but his pass blocking grade of just south of 72 at 71.6, that's pretty solid. Remember, in the PFF, 70s is a really good player. 80s is kind of like Pro Bowl level. 90s is Hall of Fame stuff, right? So when you see 70s in the PFF grade, you're like, okay, that's a guy who's really good at that. Now, obviously, the 50s in the run blocking grade, that has to get better. But I think stylistically, he's not a great fit for what Monken wants to do with the Baltimore Ravens. I think he actually fits a little bit better with that Mike McDaniel offense in terms of more traditional kind of wide zone scheme attacks instead of the zone read game that the Baltimore Ravens kind of play. I think he's a better fit for a team like Miami. And look, his valuation at $6.4 million, that's obviously a fair price for the Miami Dolphins to go in and get a quality offensive guard with experience, a guy who can come in, play anywhere if needed in a depth situation if and when injuries do happen. As Dolphins fans, you're very well aware of that fact. Plus, I think he can slide in and be a starter day one. He's probably my favorite pickup among the entire guys we're going to list over the course of the next few minutes for the Dolphins to get. But there's another offensive guard that I think could be an interesting pick, and that's Ben Bredeson as well from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers most recently. Bredeson's an interesting guy because his numbers are terrible, but his film is just a blast to watch. He's just an old school brawler, fighter, ugly offensive lineman, likes to basically get down in the mud, get his hand on the ground, and just kind of bully people a little bit. His film is ugly but effective, right? He's very Orlando Brown Jr.-ish in that respect, but he's a good player. According to his PFF grades, again, the numbers there aren't great. 56.0 overall, 53 run blocking grade, 59.9, just under 60 as a pass blocker. But his grades really are mediocre because he just looks ugly on film. It's not a very clean rep, but he just finds a way to get it done. He's also a little bit of a bully, a little bit of an enforcer. For me, he's a guy you bring in, especially when you pair with the young left tackle or young tackle, whatever they eventually put him at, Patrick Paul, who we did a lot of film reviews on, who I think is a future star. I love his mentality. He's just got a nasty demeanor to him. Bredesen follows that same kind of mold. He brings an attitude to this Dolphins offense that I think has been missing in a lot of respects. I personally think if you go Bredesen, even though his valuation is about $8 million, he is a good addition if you're trying to change the culture up front. I think Mekari is the better player. I think he's the guy that can come in and make you better as an offensive line on paper and add a lot of great depth and versatility. I prefer him. But if you want to change the culture and mentality of this Dolphins up front in terms of their running game, just a little nastiness at the line of scrimmage, Bredesen is the way to go.
Yeah, Nick, I agree with those moves, and I like them both. And there's a little history between the both. They both were Baltimore Ravens together at one point in time as well. So I think that these both guys are really, really interesting. And I do agree with you. Bredeson's more of a culture guy, but McCary's more of, I think, the he's a great fit because you can get him and not care about where he's gonna go on your offensive line. As you alluded to, he's very versatile, but just how versatile. This is a guy that's almost played 1,000 snaps at three different positions so far in the NFL. You look, he's played 1,200 snaps at right tackle. He's played 965 snaps at left guard. He's played 918 snaps at center. Then, even more, he's played 685 snaps at left tackle and played 272 snaps at right guard. So this guy's literally played every single position on the offensive line for a hefty amount of snaps, like at least multiple games starting at the position at a time. And that's what, when I watched the Baltimore Ravens, that's what he brought to the table. Is this is a guy who's pretty good. There's some positions he's better at than others, but overall he's pretty good at everything. He's steady Eddie across the board every year, no matter what position he's playing in. You're going to get about the same production of him. But whenever someone got hurt, he's the guy that you'd be like, okay, well, we've got a better center than we do a left guard. Kick McCary over to left guard and let's get the new center in here. Or we got a better right tackle. Let's kick him over to right tackle. Get the right guard that we have a little bit better. Have him come in. I think that is why I love McCary. That's what he brings to the table. Bredesen, he brings that culture, brings that mentality, the dog in him that people like to talk about. He's really rough and tumble style of guy, but I think McCary is just so versatile. It's hard for teams to pass him up. And for the evaluation he's getting, I think he's going to be a bargain for the Miami Dolphins just to bring him in and really help out anywhere that he needs to. I think anyone that gets Patrick McCary is going to get a very, very solid addition to their offensive line. Never going to be disappointed. But we're talking about things that need to be upgraded. I think this is one of the bigger upgrades coming up next that the Dolphins need to address, and that's the safety position. I think after losing a couple guys, free agency, they need to go out and really address the safety position very, very aggressively. And we've got two options that they can take that I think would be very good bargain upgrades, like we said, bring a lot of value in. Let's start with the first one. The first one is none other than Julian Blackmon, former Colt, coming in here. He's a really interesting player. He's got a lot of great film on him, and I like what he brings to the table. Young guy, too. Not too much crazy about him. Let's get into his stats here, though. You see, he's 26 years old. Great age. I think bringing him in, you have a good long future with him. 69.3 PFF grade, a 73.5 coverage grade. That is very good. And a 60.3 PFF tackling grade, meaning he's a solid tackler. And when you look at his games, there's a couple of lower games in PFF. If you have a bad game, it really drops your grade a lot. But he's got a lot of games where he's tackling in the mid to high 80s, which is absolutely fantastic. So this guy is a very dominant tackler as well. I think he brings a lot to the table. And at $7.6 million valuation, I don't think it's a crazy amount to bring in a young, up and coming good safety. So I think Julian Blackmon seems to me like a really great addition, a young get for this back of the defense that you could bring in and grow with. And I think he's going to be a steal going forward because he's just gotten better every single year. If you look at his PFF grade, starting at a 59 his first season, all the way up to a 69 now this season, getting better every season. Next up, I have another good one for the Miami Dolphins, and that's none other than former Viking Cameron Bynum. I think he brings a lot to the table here. Let's jump into his stats, and we can break it down here in just a second. You look at him, another guy, young. I like that. 26 years old, 61.6 PFF grade, a 58.6 coverage grade, and a 72.5 PFF tackling grade. Like I said, a little bit lower in coverage, but I think he's going to be just fine. But you bring this guy in because he's a sure tackler as well. About 12 points better of a tackler than Blackmon. I think they both are interesting. They both bring different things in the table of what they're able to do. And at that $5.6 million valuation for Bynum, it's a little bit cheaper. So I think this is an option where if you want a guy that brings something a little bit different to the table, you have a better coverage safety in mind, maybe someone on your roster that you like to kick up, maybe someone that you draft that you want to bring in, you can get Bynum for a little bit of a discount. But no matter who they go after, I think either of these guys would be really, really smart.
Yeah, I'm a big Cameron Bynum fan, to be totally honest, because he's to me the perfect glue guy in the back end of the secondary. And the safety position has really kind of been undervalued. Really a lot for a good reason, right? If you have a great safety, kind of a game wrecker, playmaker like Kyle Hamilton for Baltimore, he can be a special player. But outside of that, you're just looking for a guy that doesn't screw the pooch, and a guy who, when he has the opportunities to make the tackles, he does, who communicates well, who can move all over the formation. And that's exactly what Cameron Bynum did. He was sort of the safety valve for the Minnesota Vikings, who ran, for those of you who aren't familiar, just extremely exotic blitzes and crazy stuff. Dolphins fans, you should be familiar because their DC, Flores, was, of course, your head coach for a number of years. Ran a lot of exotic, crazy stuff. And Bynum was just basically the guy on the back end at the deep safety, middle safety, a lot of situations, or at least half field the other half of the time. He was the guy that was just there to, hey, listen, you're going to be in bad situations because we're bringing the house. You're going to be one on one with the entire field against a receiver, tight end, and you got to make the tackle if the quarterback is able to get the ball off in time. Otherwise, it's a touchdown. So it puts Bynum in a lot of tough positions, and he made the play. Good, sure tackler, like the statistics highlighted there. Is he an all pro? No, but he's just a great team guy. He was more than willing to put up with that tough situation. Never heard a peep from him. If you look at the other safeties, for example, Harrison Smith or safety, the other safety from Minnesota Vikings, he got all the accolades because he got to do all the fun stuff, the robber coverages, the blitzes off the edge, things like that that made people talk about him and make him more money. Bynum was the guy on the back end that just had to cover it when Harrison Smith was sent on the blitzes, and he did it with a smile on his face. I think you could get him at a great discount, that 5.6 valuation or whatever it says. I think you get him for less. One of the more underrated players I think available, especially for any team that needs a safety. You need a glue guy, a guy that can come in and just get along with everybody. He's more than happy to do the dirty work. I love Cameron Bynum to do just that. And Blackman, though, focusing on him briefly, he is the more aggressive move because he is a better player than Cameron Bynum, much more versatile, in fact. But injuries are a concern with Blackman. Consistency is a concern. If you go the Blackman route, it's the more aggressive route. It'll probably cost you $2 to $5 more million per year. So you're eating up a lot of your, again, very limited $28 million in cap space here. But there's a much higher ceiling that he can become a much higher quality player, right? There's a chance he could be just as good as Holland, maybe even better. And of course, obviously, the Dolphins are reportedly are moving on from Holland. We're assuming they're not going to bring him back as a free agent. Of course, they obviously still could. I think Blackman is the more aggressive route for Miami, but I personally am such a big Cameron Bynum guy. I think sometimes it's not the better player because you have 11 guys on the field. You need a couple guys that are glue guys and get everyone on the same page that are willing to do the dirty work that allow other players to be the playmaker. And I think Bynum is just that kind of guy. I think he's a great fit. If any team that signs Cameron Bynum, in my opinion, you're going to be a lot better on defense because of it, because he's just that much of a team guy who's willing to do the dirty work. He was put in tough situations with the Minnesota Vikings and overall did a pretty good job. Plus, you're going to get him at a great value. Now, speaking of value, let's move on to our third position group here. And this is the defensive line, defensive tackle. And here, the Miami Dolphins have a couple clear routes to go. And again, we talked about it a couple times already. The Dolphins have $28 million in cap space. So let's say they throw $6 million of that at the safety position, just throwing that out there as an average. And if you look, of course, at where we started this whole thing off, when you look at the offensive guard, let's say we're looking at another 7, 8 million there, right? So you're looking at half your cap space, right? You're down to 14 million. Now, obviously, you're going to have to sign rookies, your draft picks, or you want to keep a few million in dry powder if there's a veteran comes available for a 1 year, $5 million thing here that just an opportunity pops up. So you don't have a whole lot of cap space to really play with up to this point. That means you have to be really efficient at defensive tackle. And that's why we start with Bobby Brown III from the Los Angeles Rams. Again, one of these glue guys. He was on a very, very good Rams front four, front five. They do a 3-4 kind of defense over there in Los Angeles. Didn't get the attention that Jared Verse, Fisk, Kobe Turner, Young, right? 4 really good players for the Rams up front that they all got, and they're all really good players. They deserve the attention. But Bobby Brown was just a guy who just did his job, play in and play out, didn't get the stats, didn't get a lot of the numbers, things like that. But he just, again, did his job. The old Bill Belichick method, just a guy who goes out there, doesn't get the notoriety, just fights off double teams, does the stunts, runs the picks for his teammates, plays well against the run when the opportunities are there. And he doesn't get the accolades, but he's a good player. And I think that's what we're seeing from Brown. If you look at his numbers here on the screen, he's a young player. He's only 25 years old. His PFF grade, not ideal, 61.4. Run defense grade, solid at 66, 65.7. Pass rush is 55.5. I will throw one caveat in there in the pass rush, however, because of the way the Rams used them, they basically used him as sort of I don't want to say a QB spy, but as a nose guard, not in a real pass rushing environment. And when they did run stunts and things like that involving Bobby Brown, he was the guy that was setting the pick for guys like Visk or Kobe Turner. So his pass rush grade in terms of his talent, I think it's really hard to tell just basically how the Rams use him. But to me, if you're the Dolphins, you use him as a run defender, right? You bring him in to be a cheap guy and a team guy to help unlock some of your other players. Of course, we're all talking about Chop Robinson, who looks like an outstanding star. He had a great rookie season, especially second half of the year. Loved him coming out of Penn State. He's becoming a great player. And the best part about Bobby Brown, he is so darn cheap. His valuation is $1.2 million. You could literally bring him in on a 2 year, $8 million deal with like maybe just 1 or 2 million guaranteed, and Brown would be ecstatic. Your defensive line would be better because of it. Now, going into our second option at defensive line, this I think is a little more interesting, and that's Treshaun Wharton from the Kansas City Chiefs. Much better player, much better pass rusher, disruptive force. Not so good against the run, right? 48.3. You can see his stats there if we throw them up on the screen. 71.9 against the pass as a pass rusher, 60.8 overall. Much more of a disruptive force. He actually did very well, interestingly enough, against the Philadelphia Eagles in the run defense game in the Super Bowl. So he's kind of a back and forth as a run defender. It's really hard to tell because obviously, with the Chiefs, with Chris Jones, guys in the interior defensive line for Kansas City, they split a lot of reps. So maybe he just got some bad run defense opportunities, and when he got more chances, he played better. Really hard to see, but I think right now the Miami Dolphins, if they go after a guy like Wharton, they're going after him for his pass rush as an interior defensive lineman. And I think that has to speak to what the Dolphins' strategy will be as a unit. Do they want to go more hyper aggressive pass rush, maybe a little undersized, or do they want to try and emphasize stopping the run and do a collective team approach? If you're going to be an aggressive pass rushing team, which isn't a terrible idea when you look at the structure of the AFC, of course, Burrow, Jackson, Josh Allen, Drake May's coming up, right? You look at obviously Mahomes is still going out there. Geno Smith now with the Raiders, Justin Herbert, right? There's enough big time quarterbacks, CJ Stroud. There's enough big time quality quarterbacks where, well, if we can just get after the quarterback and harass him enough, we can find a way to get by on defense, right? And I think if you take that approach, Wharton is the way to go. Again, an underrated pass rusher who didn't get the credit because he was on a team with Chris Jones, but he wins one-on-one opportunities when he gets them. Is he a guy that's going to just blow up double teams and be a future superstar? I don't think so, but he's got decent enough size, decent enough quickness. His valuation is more expensive, $7 million. So for me, this is say, hey, if you can get him on a 2-year, $10 million deal, maybe undercut a little bit just because people undervalue him, that would be a great opportunity for Miami. Do not overpay Deshaun Wharton because he hasn't gotten enough reps, in my opinion, to deserve being overpaid his valuation. But if you are able to get him at a discount, he is a great pick. But if you can't go the Wharton route, which again, the cap constraints are real, Bobby Brown would be a really solid team player for this front four.
Yeah, Nick, I think both these guys, they both are just, they're not the best players in the world, but they're very solid and they both bring something distinct to the table when it comes to that aspect. So I think both of these guys, they're good. In summation, if I had to pick between the two, I think if you're the Dolphins, if you have the money and you want to add another pass rusher to your lineup, I think you go ahead and get Wharton. I think, like you said, if you can underpay for him a little bit, which I would imagine that they're able to do, not a bad pickup for the Dolphins. But if you don't, you have your eye on something else, maybe you want to spend a couple extra dollars on a different position, splurge a little bit. I think bringing in a guy like Brown is good enough. I think he brings something to the middle of the defense that you need to. It's like you said, he's been asked to do things. He'd be a very good complement to a guy like Chop Robinson, be able to just do his job, like you said, and have Chop Robinson attack the quarterback, which I think he's going to just get even better. Had a great season last year, but overall, I think this was just a really strong move by the Dolphins to get Robinson, and you want to build on that. Bringing a guy like Brown, I think it could help out a lot. So, depending on what they want to do, I think you got some good options here, and that's what we're bringing to the table today is options for the Dolphins. I think they're really good budget options that we've presented to everybody. So, nonetheless, if you've watched this far, I think, give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button, see what the next video we're going to post is. We'll have some more Dolphins content very soon in the future. But for now, I'm Andrew, that's Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.